Hello, CSFL. Welcome back to yet another episode of the CSFL podcast videocast. Episode 11, I believe. We're getting through these now. We're in double digits now. And today, I guess our main thing we're going to look at is around a panic index. Something that we've had to think about, and something a little bit different to our usual discussions on trades and teams performing and player performances, and to try and sort of talk you through this and break down a couple of teams. I'm joined as ever by our regular sort of number two really now on the video cast, Josh, the Titans GM. Josh, welcome back to yet another episode. Are you ready to try and talk the rest of the league through the panic index and what this means?
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to doing this one. I was kind of happy to get back on the pod, and this seems like a really, really good episode to come back on because I'm probably one of the teams that should be panicking right now. So,
yeah, I mean, we've been a bit of a hiatus, I think, with the episodes. I think mainly because teams have been bedding in, and it's we only want to talk about interesting stuff and juicy stuff about the CSFL and. Where there's been a couple of trades and things, we could easily talk about that, but I think this is going to be slightly different and a little bit more interesting, I think, for our viewers. So, I guess, what is the panic index? So, the panic index is something I've seen in a couple of other similarly podcasts and videocasts that are going around for different leagues and different sports genres. But essentially, what it means is you look at the league and the current standings and. Being a third of the way through a season, Josh, teams are in that position now where, they might be looking at playoffs, they might be looking at wild card, or they might be looking down the end of the barrel and looking at the draft already. As we know, the draft names came out this week. And the panic index kind of takes that. And we just talk about a few teams in both conferences that, based on their current standings, their current win-loss ratio, might be considering whether to panic or not. And what we're going to do today, Josh, we're going to essentially look at those teams and we're going to decide whether they should panic or not, or whether it's a case of a bad schedule, unlucky injury, a trade that hasn't quite come off yet, that's still developing, various things. And that's how we're going to approach this. So let's see how we get on.
All right, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with the national conference first, I think. And the first one that I've got on my list here is if we start in sort of the initial order. So I guess let's start with the National East and let's have a look at the New York Giants.
Yeah,
so I think so. So just to give everyone a bit of context, the Giants last year, I believe, they made the playoffs, I believe, and I think they won this division last year. So big expectations coming into the year. The roster's set for win now. It hasn't quite panned out for them, has it yet?
Yeah, no, and they're one of the high cap teams too. So they're definitely in win now mode. They don't have a lot of room, to tinker with the roster or margin for error, and they just have not gotten off to a very great start. I think that I would think their GM would say it's fair that he did not expect them to be 1-5 at this point. So.
No, I don't think so. I think when you've got Manning in at quarterback and guys like Olsen as options, and a lot of the team is sort of getting to that peak or sort of falling off of the peak of their performance now. So this team, yeah, go on.
I was just saying it's crazy because Manning might be part of the problem this season. When you dig into his stats, he's already got 12 interceptions for the season. He's on dare I say Vince Young. Path to interception glory. He's we know to be doing that. So
we know how well Vince Young did last year. When we had, I think, our second episode, and we were trying to make a decision for you whether to keep playing him or not. And well, it kind of was a mixed bag for you. But perhaps we'll talk about Manning in a bit. But should we just have a look at the results first? I guess in terms of where they've got to for this situation. So they are 1-5. I think what's interesting for me, Josh, though, is that out of the 6 teams they have played, I believe 5 of them are teams that are with winning records, though. So that kind of for me says a lot. And just to give you a flavour of the teams that they've lost to so far, the Seattle Seahawks who are absolutely flying, the Dallas Cowboys who are flying, the Baltimore Ravens who are doing really well, the Green Bay Packers, and the current champs, the New Orleans Saints. So it's not as if they've had an easy schedule to date.
Yeah, man, I think we're going to find with a lot of these teams, they've had very strong schedules when we start going through them and digging into exactly what the reasons are for them to be losing. But at the same time, if you want to be a contending team, these are the teams you still have to beat in the playoffs. So, I mean, even if they go on a run later, they're kind of showing that they, even if they turn it around, they might be a one and done team.
Yeah, I think so, and I think 1-5 is a tough situation to get into. And you mentioned a couple of, one player in particular that might be the root of the problem at the moment, be it his performance to date or the strategy they're running on offense. But should we talk about Manning for a bit, because this guy is, he probably is one of the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the league at least, based on ratings. And I mean, just to give you a sense, so last year his rating was 100, and he threw 7 interceptions through the whole season with 24 touchdowns. This year to date, he's only played in 5 of the 6, started in 5 of the 6 games. So I think the first game they didn't sub out their back bench chart. So, but when you look at his stats to date, so as you mentioned, 12 interceptions for 7 touchdowns and a rating this year of just 67.8. So what does that tell you, Josh?
Well, I think that, it kind of tells me that maybe there were some changes on offense. The first thing that comes to mind, and I think this is one of the teams that got, kind of decimated in free agency. I think they might have lost their best running back and their best wide receiver in free agency. So when I was kind of looking at them earlier, I noticed that they don't really have much in the way of depth in both of their other skill positions. So maybe, Eli's just out there trying to do too much at the age of 30, which, kind of sounds, very funny and very close to real life around, if I remember this time for the Giants. So, they've got to upgrade in those 2 positions, because I think they're even having a lot of drops. When I was looking at their stats, I think that I think Greg Olsen had a lot of drops, if I remember correctly, and I think their other wide receiver is Mario Manningham, and I believe he had a lot of drops as well.
Yeah, I think it's a weird one for me, because when I looked through this roster and I was like, I don't necessarily understand why the Giants are 1-5, because I look at some of the talent. So the first thing that stood out for me, if I go back a page, if you look on just the offense, so one of the issues they've had is they haven't been able to run the ball very effectively. They are a middle of the tier team for running the ball. For passing the ball, we know there's interceptions. There's probably some slight issues there, but they're still a good passing team when you look at just the basic stat line that is provided on this page. But when they're running the ball, they haven't run the ball very effectively. And I thought, okay, I think they lost. I can't remember who it was they had at running back now. They did have an elite running back last year, I believe. And I was thinking, okay, maybe that's a factor. They've had to just. Yeah,
wasn't there running back Bradshaw last year?
Yeah, it was Bradshaw, wasn't it? So they lost probably a top 3 running back last year. So maybe that was the reason. But they've managed to acquire, bring Pearson, who I think's more than adequate in terms of as a runner. So, I mean, for me, I think that's probably not an issue then. So, for me, I think it's more an offensive strategy point, I think, for these guys.
Yeah. No, I would lean more in that direction. I think it's probably just, they didn't change their system from whatever they were running back when they had, their 3-headed attack. Now that it's, more of a Eli has to carry everything, that maybe they need to, adapt more to him, maybe some quick short passes. He's very, very accurate from what his ratings say. So and he has a lot of arm strength. So maybe you just have to start working it down the field that way, since you don't have any top end wide receivers anymore. And you kind of use your pass to open up the run.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but for me, I almost feel like these guys should become. So if you remember last year, the Colts were a very, very good offensive team. And the reason the Colts were a very good offensive team was because they essentially passed the ball 85, 90% of the time. that's where I feel the Giants could go. If the Giants were, it sounds weird because Manning has had quite a off start to the season, but I almost want him throwing the ball more. I don't necessarily want him running the ball as much as they are at the minute. So that's where I would go with it.
Yeah, I agree
on
with
that
that.
side. I guess on the defensive side, I mean, they're middle of the pack. They're a very good pass defense team. Maybe they just need to address some of the, the ability to stop the run. Because I think, if I remember right, a lot of these teams, if I go to like the Saints are a run-heavy team and they got pounded by them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, their defense probably gets put in a bad position quite a bit too with all the interceptions that Eli's been throwing.
So, I mean, for me, and then I was looking for the rest of the roster. As you kind of said, wide receivers probably an issue. They don't have as much talent as they've historically have had there, I think. But on everywhere else across the roster, I can see there's a lot of strength there and a lot of good skill guys. So, for me, the 1-5 record. I mean, looking at games they've got coming up, so they've got the Steelers next, another interesting team really. Then the Falcons, the Bengals, the Browns who are flying, then Tampa Bay, and then we sort of go into some Eagles games and Panthers games. I would be surprised if this team stays below 0.500 by the end of the season, though.
Yeah, so would I. I think they'll climb back close to 500, maybe like 480-ish. 500 maybe slightly above, because their schedule is just going to lighten up a little bit naturally.
Yeah, I think so. I think they've had a tough schedule, but there's a couple of things that I think they need to address. But probably not where they expected to be this year. I think they were probably thinking they would be borderline championship contenders, and it hasn't quite materialized in that sense for them. So I guess on our panic index.
High on the panic index. Very, very
high on the panic index. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't think it's a case of completely chop it down and rebuild it, though. I think it's a panic, but it's a controlled panic. So for me, I have rather than it being like we're going to have to rush out and evacuate the building because it's just on fire. I think this is more of a test drill for them in that they're testing the alarms and testing some issues, but it's just to get a better time, really. So I guess, I think they need to panic, but a controlled panic, and I think that's kind of where you're coming from as well.
Yep, I completely agree with that assessment.
Okay, cool. So should we move on to another team in the National Conference? Who do you want to pick next, Josh?
I think we should take a look at the 49ers. I think that they're one that might not, that the team's pretty talented, and I think that their GM might have also come into the season expecting them to perform better than they are. I know I did. I'm pretty fond of their quarterback. I think Alex Smith is really underrated, but they seem to not be having the greatest of seasons, and I think we could probably take a look into maybe trying to see what some of the reasons why might be.
Yeah. Should we do that? So just to kind of summarize on the 49ers and where they are at the minute. So I guess when you compare their schedule to the Giants, who we just talked about, for me, their schedule is a lot lighter than the Giants' schedule. So in terms of games they've played, so they beat the Vikings in a close game. I mean, their scorelines have been fairly close, apart from the Texans game that's just gone. But they played the Seahawks, the Redskins, the Cardinals as well. For me, I wouldn't have expected them to lose 4 on the bounce in that schedule.
Well, I mean, the first thing looking at their schedule that sticks out to me is if you look at all of those scores, they haven't scored over 18 points a single time this season.
No, that's true.
That I haven't even gotten much further than that. That's just already just flashing at me right there. Like, man, these guys are really struggling to score.
Yeah, and it's very much highlighted in their team stats as well. In that, the terms of their offense, in terms of their ability to pass and their ability to rush the ball. I mean, they're in the top 10 for pass completion, I believe, but I think for rushing they're down. But overall, in terms of yardage gains, they're quite low, I think, when I looked at it. So offense is definitely an issue for them. Where do we point the blame at this one, though? I do not know.
Yeah, because I mean, Alex Smith is not having a terrible season. He's as efficient as ever. 70% completion percentage. 5 to 4 touchdown interception ratio. So obviously you'd want him to have more touchdowns, but he's not really turning the ball over. So I mean, do we pin the blame on Frank Gore and Brian Westbrook? Like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Alex Smith his rating seems in line with last year. Let's have a look at Gore and Westbrook quickly, just see how they've been doing this year. Yeah, I mean, I guess as you probably expect, their attempts are slightly down, where they're probably sharing the ball the same as last year. Difficult to tell because for me, I can't see much of a drop off. I mean, maybe they're not being given the right situation, possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a tough one because on paper they've been doing okay.
And that's kind of where I was at too. I was trying to see if I could put my finger on a particular reason, and just maybe if it's nothing with any of the players, as much as I'd say maybe they're just getting out coached, maybe they just aren't running a system that's conducive for putting up big points.
Yeah, maybe.
Is there any way we can look up Alex Smith's average yards per attempt? Well, I found it. He's averaging 6.8 yards per attempt. I don't know how close that is in line with the entire league. Let's see if I can find that.
I mean, it's a tough one because as well, I guess an important point whilst you're looking that up is Alex Smith is on the end of his contract this year as well. So there's a big decision to make here in that where the 49ers are is whether they just cut bait with Smith and trade him, or whether they put a franchise tag on him, or whether they try and re-sign him. Because if it's not working out for whatever reason, because if it's Smith's fault or other points on the offense are just not working for Smith, really, whether it's better for them to cut loose and sort of rebuild and work around a different style of quarterback. I mean, they've got Carr who's sitting there waiting, Ponder as well. I think he was drafted this year, I believe. Maybe Ponder. So they've got two young, decent quarterbacks who can come in there.
And looking closer at the numbers, like he is kind of I think would say the average of the league's probably like 8 and somewhere like for the upper echelon quarterbacks is around a little higher than 8 yards per attempt. So maybe you got to force him to throw the deep ball a little bit longer. You guys did a good job of making these players true to form, because that's Alex Smith's problem in real life. He just very efficient underneath guy, doesn't want to take a lot of shots down the field.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the challenge, isn't it, with Smith? I mean, but for me, I can't see on paper how the offense is struggling so much. I mean, they've got good running backs, they've got good wide receivers, guys who can make plays. They've got options. When you've got the tools to work with, and the quarterback's not being effective, you kind of have to point it at the quarterback, even though he's not necessarily dropped off in his performance from last year, and last year wasn't really a great year for the 49ers anyway. So
that's why they're paid the big bucks. They're supposed to be the leader of the team. So
yeah.
Someone's going to take that L.
And I mean, to be fair to the other side of the ball for the 49ers, they've kept them in it for a lot of these games. I mean, it's been close scores. It's not necessarily been that they've been blown away on defense. So the defense has been working pretty well. I think they've been one of the better defenses so far in the national. So it's just a case of getting that offense sorted, I think. And I think they've got a big decision as whether they do stay with Smith, or whether they let Carr have a little go at doing it. He's a bit more experienced. He's got, I think he's slightly different type of player. His arm strength is slightly better. I think his accuracy might be slightly worse, but it'd be interesting to see whether they do hand the reins over to Carr for a couple of games, just to see whether that gets them ticking over.
Yeah, no, I think that might be something worth looking at, or at the very least, if they're letting their coaches control the play calling, maybe they should if they have the time. I know we have a lot of commitments, but maybe they can take the time to make their own playbook that might help them out a bit, and just only give him plays that force him to throw downfield and take some more shots to the end zone. Because out of everything we looked at, the only thing that looks a little iffy is his yards per attempt. He's just only working a certain part of the field, and maybe that's why he's only got 5 touchdowns this far into the season.
Yeah, maybe. So what do you think? Is it time to panic for the 49ers, or is it just a case of bad schedule, Smith not playing as well, or where do you see them on our sort of panic status?
Yeah, I would definitely put them high on the panic scale as well, because they've had a relatively soft schedule comparatively to a lot of the other teams. So the problems are internal; they're not external. There's something off with that offense, and they're going to have to sit down and figure out how to get this team to generate more touchdowns.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think it's probably time to panic for the 49ers, because you don't necessarily want to go around throwing a huge contract on Smith if he's not performing with the guys you've got, and you've got some very good guys who can help him. So I think it's time to seriously think about that. So the one other team I've got in the National Conference that I had on the panic index are the Arizona Cardinals, who are currently 2-3. I guess I've got them on here because they've got some good talent. I think the reason I've got them on here, though, is because look at this injury list. So they're currently 2-3. They've been a bit of a mixed bag this year, which kind of reflects the injuries. But just to sort of tell you some of the players they've got injured. So Fitzgerald, Skelton, Clary, Haggins, Washington, Backus, and Jones. All guys who probably, with the exception, I think, of Skelton, who I don't think is necessarily their main option at sort of quarterback. But Fitzgerald out, Haggins out, Backus out. So these are all guys who are pretty essential to this Cardinals roster. This is why I've got them in the panic, not because they've been performing necessarily badly or because they've not got wins they should have had, but just because they've got a lot of injuries now. And is it a case of whether you make a trade or what direction does this team go in? I mean, you don't necessarily want to be in that middle of the pack, do you?
No, you don't. And I definitely empathize with that. I was there not too long ago when I had I think it was 8 or 9 starters injured at once by the end of the first game of the season. So you're kind of sitting there wondering, should I just go ahead and sit this out, or should I make some moves to try to make sure I have enough talent to put on the field just to try to get by? And it's a really rough spot to be in, and it's definitely a panic feeling. You sit in because those things are outside of your control. They're kind of just left to the whims of the game.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for them. I guess the question is whether some of the other guys can step up. I mean, Fitzgerald is so essential to them. And if I look at that wide receiver core, I mean, Jones is out as well. So they've only technically got, I think, 2 designated wide receivers on the roster now, which is going to cause its own problems anyway. I mean, it's going to limit your number of plays you can use and what type of strategy you can employ. I guess one of the saving graces is that they've still got Richardson at running back, who has been in phenomenal form, I think, this year for them.
Yeah, they still have an inside shot at winning their division. I mean, they're 1-0 in the division, and the Seattle Seahawks are 2-0. So, they haven't played the Seahawks yet. Mess around and beat them twice and win the rest of the division. You could sneak in. So maybe they can. Maybe they have a shot at just scraping by. That bye week was really timely for them. They can try to get some of these bodies back.
Yeah, the bye week kind of was massive for them. I guess it's interesting in terms of their actual results. So they lost to the Packers, which was probably expected. They lost to the Cowboys, probably expected, and the Titans. But I guess for me, it's interesting that they've beaten the teams they should have, you'd expect them to beat anyway. So the 49ers, who we've talked about, and the Falcons, who are sort of going through that sort of mini rebuilding at the minute. So I mean, they've got 2 away games next against the Texans and Bears. I mean, that's going to be interesting because the Bears are probably underperforming, and the Texans are obviously flying at the minute. But it's going to be tough whilst they've got a lot of these key guys out at the minute, and they haven't got the cap room necessary to bring in guys off the free agency waiver wire, really.
Yeah, no, it's a really tricky situation for them. This might be one of those teams that kind of goes into a partial rebuild as well, because I mean, like, there's just nothing you can do about injuries. If your guys are out, you don't want to sacrifice everything, making trades just to try to scrape by the possibility of getting to the playoffs. You want to either you're contending or you're rebuilding. It's just no one wants to be stuck in the middle. So
yeah. I mean, I think the one that I feel sorry for is Clary, who ruptured his Achilles, who they signed in free agency for $7 million, and probably hoping he'd be a catalyst for that offense, and hasn't quite worked out that way.
Definitely a guy I'd love to have. That was just terrible for them.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like it's like they have two guys who are probable. But I mean, just let's look at that. They have the tackle, backup quarterback, and their best wide receiver. Fitzgerald's gone for the season, basically.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and it's every injury I've had, whether it says 1 to 2 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks, if it says out, it's usually a week or two more than what it projects. Like it's, I haven't had a single one of those where it's been the low end where 1 to 2 weeks. Oh, they're only out 1 week. No, every time it's been 3 weeks. If it actually says out. So I think we're kind of starting to get an idea of what these designations mean, and let's pray for questionables and doubtfuls and probables, because otherwise you're not gonna have them for a while.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. So, but for me, I'll say on the panic index, I don't have them that high because they've got these injuries, and they, as you kind of said, they can almost more or less shut down for the season pretty much. They've got so many key guys out that they can just roll with what they've got, and they'll come back stronger next year because they might have slightly better draft picks, or they might be able to clear some of the older guys off towards the trade deadline.
They don't have a lot of draft picks, so maybe they'll they do have a decision to make. I think either are we going to go into sell now mode, or are we we're just going to be happy rolling back what we have next year with a bit of improvement and some health. I personally turned down. I was letting all of my players train at 22, and I just went ahead and turned them all down to 21. So I finally have a healthy roster again. And even though I've noticed that less players have been improving every single week, I think I'd rather just have health. So that might be something to look at too.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so I think that kind of finishes us up with the National Conference. Should we move on to the American Conference? And who's the first one that you have down on here for your panic index?
My first one was the Steelers, because I mean they are just taking it from all sides this season. I believe they lost Roethlisberger for a long time. Then they lost their backup quarterback Leftwich for a while, and they've just I've been kind of keeping my eye on them because personally is one of my family members' favorite teams. So I just kind of always look at what the Steelers are doing just in general, and I'm kind of shocked to see the state of their current affairs, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that. So obviously they started the season pretty terribly in 2 losses to the Broncos and the Bengals, 2 teams you probably would expect on paper for them to beat. They then beat the Colts. They lost to the Browns, who have been in great form so far, and then 2 back-to-back wins against the Redskins and the big one against the Patriots today just gone. So they're 3-3. So I guess my question for you really is, why Roethlisberger's back now. Why are you still panicking over the Steelers?
Because I just think that the AFC's a really tough conference. We have quite a few teams that are just that have GMs who would rather try to win than go through rebuilds and such. And there's nothing wrong with different paths. I'm not trying to say anything like that, but I just think that like the Colts are trying to win, the Patriots are trying to win, the Steelers are trying to win, the Ravens, the Titans, the Browns, the Broncos. So our division seems to have, I think, just more GMs right now. I think maybe all 3 of the openings might be on the other side as well. So it's just really competitive, and it might be too late in the season to try to snag a wild card at this point, because I think that there's maybe 6 teams sitting at that 3-3 point right now.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few teams sitting at that point now. I guess for me, the Steelers, are a team that's built for kind of win now. We know that based on historic
Yep.
references of where they are and some of the talent they've got. But for me, I guess this is where, if I was the Steelers GM, this is where I would go with it, really. And I'll be interested to get your thoughts on it. So we know there's quite a few teams now that are shopping around what I would call elite talent players because they can't re-sign them or they don't want to pay them the money.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're on teams that the record's probably not where they wanted to be. So if I was Steelers GM, that's the kind of players that I'd be looking at in terms of moving some of these picks for this year and next year. Because heck, my team's built to win now. I've got Roethlisberger. I've got the likes of Mendenhall and
Yeah.
Wallace and real talented players who are
And
ready
they've gotten
to.
all their picks.
I believe they have because they were on a computer controlled last year for
Yeah, no,
most
and
of
that's what
it.
I'm saying. That they're one of the
So
few loaded teams that has all of their picks, so they have every incentive to start trying to
yeah,
maybe trade
yeah.
some of those for extra pieces.
And because they've been on computer controlled, they've got quite a big roster as well, so they can move. Some of these lower guys who, let's be honest, are never going to see any playing time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
For some of these, these guys who, yeah, okay, they might not re-sign them. That's the risk you have to take. But that's for me where I feel the Steelers are because they are a team that really should be competing for a championship and competing against the likes of New Orleans and against the New England Patriots and so
Yep.
on. And heck, if they move a fourth or third round pick or a second round pick for someone who's really really elite, over the next 2 years, and that is the guy that gets you that nudge up from being a 3-3 or being just outside a championship contender to being a championship contender. For me, that's the risk I would take right now.
I agree. I think that's worth it if you feel like you're right on the cusp. Those are just kind of some of the moves you have to make to get over the hump.
Yeah, I think so. So for me, I can see why you have them down here on as being a panic team. But I guess for me, it's a panic because the window's a lot shorter than other teams and because they started quite slow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess did you have any team that you wanted to go and head towards next for the AFC? Anybody else you have in mind?
Yeah. So I guess the other one that I've got down here is let's go to the American South really division, and the next one I've got is yourself actually. So the Tennessee Titans, and
Yeah.
the reason I'll give myself 20 seconds. I'll talk you through it, and then we'll get your reaction. Let's do it that way. So for me, I think the Tennessee Titans are in a panic, on my panic index because as we all know, they're a team that's kind of built with talent to try and win a championship now. And last year, kind of didn't quite work out for you and the Titans. And I could probably say that's down to a bit of inexperience as a GM. But coming into this year, you've developed your own playbooks, which are kind of a key thing. So yeah, I thought the Titans coming into this season were like, yeah, they're going to make some noise. They're going to be definitely over 0.500. I would expect them to be competing for the for the playoff slot in that division. If they don't make that, I'd expect them to make some noise in the wild card. But when I look at some of the results, so just to give you a flavour, so you beat the Bills, fine. Beat the Colts, fine. Lost the Ravens and the Jaguars back to back. For me, that was the point of your 2 or your 3 game road trip where I thought, oh, okay, maybe it's not quite working out. And then obviously you've lost the Broncos quite convincingly today. So for me, I look at the strength of schedule and it's not as bad as some of the others we've talked about. I would have expected you and the Titans to probably be around, say that, 6 games played, probably around a 4 and a 2. That's kind of where I expected you to be, sort of still in nose in front, going into the rest of the season with a good commanding position, but it hasn't worked out like that. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on that really. And for me, I'll be honest, Josh, it comes back down to your quarterback situation again.
Well, actually, I'm gonna say Vince Young has actually been pretty darn awesome this season. He up until this last game was top 3 in the MVP race. So that I would have to disagree with that one. As for the Broncos game, I actually, I spent hours making a new offensive and defensive playbook, and after looking at it, neither one of them loaded up correctly, so that was my fault. I'll definitely take the blame on that one. I'm not sure if it would have helped, because the Broncos are a fantastic team. I'm not going to take anything away from them, curb stomping us, but at the same time, when you go in to look at the results and you see that, your team's best offensive play was weighted at a 1 when it should have been weighted at a 10, you can kind of understand why your quarterback only passed for 96 yards when he'd been doing so well to date. But I think I've got that squared away. The first thing I did this morning was make sure everything was exactly the way I wanted it, and I just went ahead and submitted it now. So hopefully that works itself out, and I think my schedule kind of lends itself to us making a run. I don't think we have to go against a team that has a winning record until we get to Seattle again in week 10. And then we have Seattle and the Patriots. I'm hoping that, we can steal at least one of those. And then if we beat the Colts again and steal one of those from the Texans, that puts us right at the 9-7 projection. But I still think we could win 10 games.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from. I guess for me, I'll say the reason I don't think Vince Young is probably the right quarterback for this team, and the main issue for this team is not because on the stats he's looking good, but his actual completion percentage is very low. And I think if you can get someone in there who can do the same level of performance, but get the completions up by like 10% or so, then your offense will look so much better.
Yeah. Well, that's also mitigated by, I have, as I've mentioned a few times, I had 8 starters injured, and one of the those both were my starting wide receivers. I think Mark Mariani, Andrew Johnson, and not Chris Johnson, Roddy White were all down. So, again, when we started the first 2 weeks of the season, had a healthy roster. He had a 60-something percentage, and then we played the Ravens and the Jaguars. Obviously, it plummeted, and I think this last one was my fault. So, but if you go and look at the games where we're winning, he's got a decent percentage. I think that I've kind of figured out what works for him.
Okay. I guess the interesting thing in terms of your division, just a very short side note, is that the Texans have just been flying this year, which has kind of messed up a lot of the division prospects and plans, really. I guess that's kind of been a big factor. So, yeah, okay, we'll see. I guess in terms of panicking, are you panicking yet?
Not yet. I think I'll panic when I lose my my next division game, because I'm still only one game out of being competitive for winning the division. If I can happen to win my games against the Texans, I still have a worse record and still manage to get a lock into the playoffs, and hopefully not depend on the tiebreakers that don't function correctly, as I learned last year. So
yeah, okay. And I guess interesting. So moving on to another team in your same division, really, and one that I've got down here, the Indianapolis Colts is another team that I've got on the panic index, really kind of because of a similar situation to you, really. The Colts last year, I think, won the division and had this amazing offense. They were the best offensive team, I think, in the league. Just the defense wasn't great. But this year, they've kind of regressed that offense, and the defense kind of stayed where it is. And I think that's been one of the main factors between them going, I think they were 14-2 last year, maybe, or 12-4. It was one of those two, to being a 2-3 team this year.
So I don't have the link handy, but I'm not sure if they have a GM or if they're computer run, because I know last year they did have a GM and they were like you said 14-2, just out there killing teams, whereas this year they seem to have gotten off to a very slow start, and I'm not sure if anyone's been over there making adjustments, but their offense, I guess, finally looks like it's come around a bit in their latest game against the Chargers. But there's some teams up there that they should have beat. Like going into my game against them, I was really worried about if the defense I built this year or the things I noticed would have gotten me by them, and we held them to 9 points, which I wouldn't have expected. And looking at the game, they played against the Steelers, which was next. I'm pretty sure Roethlisberger was already injured at that point, and they still let them put up 38 points. So, and they only managed to put up 13 points on their side. So I think the Colts are suffering on both sides of the ball right now. They aren't putting up as many points as they're accustomed to, and they're giving up. I think maybe the most points in the league, are pretty darn close to it.
Yeah, they are. They are one of the worst defensive teams at the minute in terms of conceding points. I guess they are a GM led team. I think the GM, they changed over the off season, I believe. So okay. I think it's a new one that's in there. So maybe he hasn't quite got around to putting his style and his stamp on this team really at the moment, which probably indicates why they're 2-3.
Making a playbook is not easy. I've definitely been struggling with that myself. It's very detailed oriented, and if you happen to set the weights incorrectly or something like that, it throws the whole thing off. So, it takes a while. We've definitely noticed the rise of the veterans this year with their offense.
Yeah. But I guess the nice shining light really is that Peyton Manning is still performing as ever for this team and doing exceptionally well.
I don't think anything will knock him off his game.
No. So I guess there is light at the end of the tunnel. If I look at the schedule coming up, they've got the Rams, the Bills, the 49ers, the Cardinals, who we've talked about, the Dolphins before they get back to sort of playing you. To me, I consider that quite a soft schedule for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if they win a good percentage of those games and turn it around from being 2-3 to being a positive over 0.500 team.
Yeah, no, I think they have a good shot at that as well. Not counting the game where they play against us, which I hope they lose.
Yeah, I for me, I don't have them as a real proper panic team because I think that the talent's there. I think they're in the same situation they were last year, aren't they, Josh? Where the offense pieces are there, just got to get them working. Once they get them working, they'll be fine. Defense is always an issue for them, and it has been an issue since the start of the league last year. So that's always going to be a concern. But the offense is what drives this team forward, and they've got to get that clicking.
Yeah, no, like I said, I completely agree. I think that we're both actually agreed on that. They just aren't clicking on either side of the ball, and it's just going to take some changes. And I mean, with arguably having the best quarterback in the league, I think you should be high on the panic index if you're not, one of these 5-0, 6-0, 4-1 teams, 5-1 teams.
Yeah, and you've just given us a brilliant segment into the next and the final panic index team. Really, as you just said, when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if you're not 5-0, 6-0, then you are going to be on our panic radar. Yeah. So it's only fitting, really, that we finish with the New England Patriots, isn't it?
Yeah, and shouts out to our commish. No commish privilege seems to be going in this league.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they've had a weird up and down start to this season. So they lost to the Jaguars in week 1, which was a surprise, and probably one of the worst games we've seen this season. 9-7. Yeah. It was a complete bloodbath.
That was when I realized that the Jaguars could probably beat anyone in this game. I mean, anyone this season just on defense alone.
Yeah, Dorsey is absolutely insane in this league. Yes. By the way, that everyone. I mean, I wouldn't say everyone. I say majority of GMs crucified that trade, saying, "Oh my goodness, why are you paying Dorsey that amount? Why are you trading for him? Why have you given up all those assets?" As the Jaguars, we thought were a rebuilding team, but it just shows one really good defensive player in the right scheme can make such a difference. And yeah, Dorsey's just insane. If he doesn't win defensive MVP this year, there's no justice.
I know. Whenever I look at this at the game generated awards, and I see that he's not at number 1, I'm just like, what is going on?
Yeah, crazy.
What do you consider the best defensive player? I think Rizzo is in the same place that all of us second-year GMs are at. In that we're actually we put our foot into making our own playbooks, and some of us have picked it up a little bit faster than others, and I think once he figures out that defense, it's going to be insane because he does have, it's funny, the joke that was made in the Slack, he does have the highest, I guess, rated defense on paper, but it's not the highest. It's not, but
No,
it's not
no,
the best performing defense in the league. So
no. I think
maybe
that's yeah. I think that's the interesting thing, really, is that I think he's done both an offense and defensive playbook now.
yeah,
Rizzo, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but on the offensive side, it seems to be going okay for them. I mean, they're putting up okay levels of points. I mean, apart from the game today against the Steelers, against the Jets and the Bears are historically a good defensive team. They're putting up 34 plus, 30, 25, 30 plus points. It's just on the other side of the ball. They've just defensively, whatever scheme Rizzo has decided to try and employ first, it's not working for them.
yeah. Maybe he just needs to just pick a base defense and just work his way out from there. Like that
Yeah,
team,
yeah.
but at the same time, that team has so much talent on defense. I can understand how you can look at all these different formations and still think to yourself, "Well, I have a 90 rated guy out there at every spot, so I should be able to just run everything." So
Yeah, I mean, for me, I wonder. I do wonder. I mean, this is a complete hunch, and there's no basis of on what I'm saying. But I wonder whether he's tried, because he's got a lot of really talented guys, whether he's trying to force too much on defense, whether he's
yeah,
necessarily blitzing too much, or he's playing slightly different coverages, and they're emphasizing trying to get the ball back as quick as possible and leaving gaps for people to pick apart in sort of the deep areas of for longer plays. I do wonder whether that's might be the cause of the issue. I have no
yeah.
basis on that. I haven't looked at the games or
No,
in terms of
I
what they've
agree.
run, but
I've often wondered too what kind of defense is being ran in New England, because I would just imagine with all the speed he has on that side of the ball, I mean, he wouldn't have to run anything fancy. He could just essentially run a shell and just wait for teams to make a mistake themselves. I mean, every team, there's no perfect team in this league right now, except for maybe the Saints. And I take that back. I guess we got to shout out to the Browns as well, who are just destroying
and
teams
the
this year
Texans,
too.
the Texans are all unbeaten as well.
But
Um,
teams do still make mistakes to turn the ball over, and with that much team, speed and such, great players like McCourty, I just feel like if he just went into like if he just ran a nickel all the time, just stayed in
mm,
just a base nickel defense at all times, he would have, the fastest defense in the, in the league, and maybe that should be something, something to consider.
yeah, I completely agree with you actually on this. I agree that perhaps Rizzo should just go back to a baseline defensive playbook, start from scratch, just play really basic defense, nothing extravagant, just conservative, because they've got guys who can make plays in that defensive unit,
Yeah,
and then see what works, see what doesn't work, start tweaking the aggressiveness on some of the play calls and the styles, and see if how much of a swing that makes. So I guess for me, Josh, I have them down the panic index because of that. But for me, the other thing is they've got fairly interesting schedule coming up. So they've got the Packers next, then they go to the Texans, who are unbeaten at the moment. They then play myself, the Lions, and yourself, the Titans, before they sort of up against the Bills and the Dolphins, and some teams that they probably would expect to beat anyway, based on the current records. So for me, I think the next two games are the really interesting ones: the Packers and the Texans.
well, I mean, I think true to real life, they're gonna make the playoffs because their division is just, just no offense to anyone else, it's kind of a cakewalk. The Jets are rebuilding right now, the
Mm-hmm.
Dolphins are rebuilding right now, the Bills are rebuilding right now, the Patriots are the only ones, going for the championship in that division, and they're already 2-0.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that I feel like even if we were to beat them and the Texans were to beat them and the Packers were to beat them, well, they're going to round out the season by beating the Bills, beating the Dolphins, beating the Jets, beating the Dolphins again, and they'll make it to the playoffs because they'll have ran through their division.
Yeah, I understand that, I think, and yeah, it probably is like that. But I would just say that the Dolphins started like this last year. They were 2-4,
True.
and they
Yeah.
went on once. I think it was 6 or 7 games back to back to get into the wild card slot. So I'm
Yeah.
not
No.
saying the Dolphins can do that this year, but that roster is probably slightly better than last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they make a late run.
Um. I guess so. I don't know. I feel like the Dolphins did sell a little bit for picks because they weren't exactly. They didn't, I think if I remember correctly, they didn't say they didn't scout the draft as well as they wanted to. So they kind of pushed everything back to this season. So, I don't know if they are as talented as they were last season, to be completely honest. As for the Jets are kind of an enigma to me. I feel like the Jets should be good. When we did our season preview, you kind of surprised me when by telling me how well the Jets really actually were. I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to them, and then they kind of came out flat. So maybe, but I think the Patriots shouldn't be panicking just because they've always kind of have that card in their back pocket. We're going to win our division.
Yeah, and I think, as we said kind of last year, as soon as Rizzo gets to understand the playbooks and the schemes and how he gets this team running, the league better watch out, because this is one of the most talented teams, and they're going to be one of the most talented teams for a very long while anyway. So,
a lot of those players are completely wrapped up. So,
I guess Patriots probably not going to panic. Maybe go back to basics with a couple of things and see if that works.
They're getting a little antsy. They're
a little antsy. I like that. That's a good way to finish it on. The Patriots are getting antsy. Josh, it's been great to have you on to talk about some of the teams and start of this season. Really, we've still got 2/3 of the season left to go. I'm sure we'll have you back on to talk about perhaps at the halfway point or something to get a proper view of the league and playoff contenders and teams waiting for it. But it's been great to have you on. Best of luck for the rest of the season.
Appreciate it. I've had a great time. Thanks for having me again.